Hey, we're Greaser Consulting, your Houston for sales engagement. In order to be successful in sales engagement, you've got to have great writing. All right, because you got to write emails, you got to write phone call scripts, you got to write LinkedIn messages, you name it, right? You got to have great writing. So in this video, we're going to dive into what it takes to be a great sales content writer. All right, sales content writer, not just any content writer, a sales content writer. So you ready to learn? Let's go. Hey there, I'm here with Erika Davis, Head of Content, Greaser Consulting. Erika, we're talking about content writing today. Really important function in sales engagement. And, you know, the name kind of speaks for itself, content writer, right? Like, well, what do? Well, they write content. But tell us, like, what is really their responsibility?
Yeah, the real responsibility of a sales content writer is to really ensure that reps believe in the content that's being created. Um, it's the writer's job to make sure that not only the voice aligns with the brand and with the go-to-market strategy, but also that the end users are or they have some input, and that when they get that content from the content writer, the reps look at it and say, yes, I feel really comfortable and excited to send this out to my prospects.
Why is that such a big deal? I mean, we talk to folks all the time, right? And you know, sometimes it's the reps on the team that write the content. Sometimes it's marketing. Sometimes maybe you just have a content writer if you're fortunate enough just to have that on your team. Like, why is confidence in the content important?
Well, confidence in the content drives adoption, right? Essentially,
There
content
it is.
you can basically create whatever sort of outbound engine that you want on the back end, but the only thing that your customers or that your prospects are going to see is that email in their inbox or that LinkedIn message or that call that they get from the rep. So essentially, if you don't have that end user content really just that process down, you don't have the buy-in from the end users, that content is not going to be used. Reps are going to go rogue and write their own content, which a rep is going to do whatever they know is going to help them close more deals or get more meetings. And so if they don't believe in the content, it's because something else is working better for them. And if you don't have that adoption, you're not going to get the data and the insights that you really want from a sales engagement platform. And so this is something that people often overlook. They think, oh, we've done all the hard work of setting up this engine in the background, and then the content's just kind of an afterthought, right? And so that you're really not setting yourself up for success if you don't have a writer that's dedicated to figuring this out.
So one of the other roles that we've talked about, and make sure if you haven't watched it yet, go and watch the content manager video so you really dive deep. I mean, the content manager is they're the orchestrator of a symphony, right? They're the conductor. They make sure everything flows and moves along and communicates with everyone. But I think about a content writer, and I think, wow, like it could be a rep that's writing content, it could be marketing, like I said earlier, but who else does the content writer interact with, and like what else is their responsibility besides writing, besides getting the confidence of the reps, all that kind of stuff? Who else do they interact with, and what does that look like?
So in a lot of cases, the reps are doing the content writing. So one of the reasons why, and I think we say this in almost every one of these videos, we like to distinguish between functions and roles, because the writer function, it could be one rep, it could be one rep per team, it could be one rep per region, it could be a team manager. So there might be a lot of different people who are really owning the content writing function. And the primary responsibility is to make sure that there's content in the sales engagement platform or wherever it is that you're using content from that's not only in alignment with what reps need for their sales process, but that's also in alignment with the overall go-to-market messaging strategy in the team in general. And so one of the primary functions of the content writer is to really be almost like a mediator to make sure that there's no misalignment between those two groups. And that often means that they need to bring in other people or inform the content manager or the solution owner when there's misalignment happening. So you can kind of think of the writer as someone that really needs to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm hearing one thing from the reps, I'm hearing another thing from leadership. Someone needs to make a decision here. And so the content writer in that case wouldn't necessarily be the person making that decision about whose voice gets heard above the other, but they would be there to say, hey, you don't agree here, and this is a problem because we can't move forward if leadership is saying write this one way and reps are saying write this another way. This is actually something that when our team goes in and functions as the content writer, content manager for teams, this is the top thing that we run into is we have a kickoff call with leadership and they say, okay, this is the messaging that we need. And then we go to reps and we say, okay, this is the messaging that we're going to create. And they'll say, why? This is maybe number 4 or 5 priority on our list. And so that's a problem the content writer runs into. It's not one that they have to solve alone, but the primary person that the content writer is going to be in touch with would be the content manager. The content manager, as you said, is sort of conducting the orchestra. And so as soon as there's a problem or as soon as something gets bottlenecked, the content manager needs to know because they are sort of the central point of contact for everyone else in the working group and everyone else on the team. So they're going to be able to figure out who needs to make this decision and who's going to disseminate that new direction out to the team. A writer might also be called in from the content enablement perspective or from the content analyst perspective if there's some kind of issue with performance. So for example, a content analyst might call a content manager who then calls the content writer in to say, hey, these sequences are underperforming. We need to A/B test. And the writer would need to be involved in those conversations so they really understand what problem they're trying to solve, what has and has not been working, so that when they go to the reps or when they go and write those new threads, they really understand what the core problem is. So that's the analyst might be someone the writer's in contact with as well. And then on the enablement side, if reps are not adopting the content, the writer can come in and interview the reps and really get down to why exactly they're not using it. Is it an enablement issue? Is it a technical issue? Is it a copy issue? They just don't like the copy. Often it could be a combination of those things. So the writer is only responsible for the copy piece, but sometimes they need to be involved in the wider conversation as well.
Yeah, one of the things I think about, Erika, is in what I'm hearing you say, working with all these, I didn't, a content writer is like the one that raises the flag, like, hey, something's off here, there's not alignment going on. If they don't do that, the content manager is not going to know, oh, like, I need to do this, this, and this. So the content writer really has to trigger that. But the other thing that they have to be is a good listener. And totally. if you're thinking about skill sets and should this person be a good a writer, let's just say that I'm a leader of a sales team and we're looking for folks from our sales team to actually write content. What are some of the attributes that I need to be on the lookout for besides being able to write?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think being a good listener is really key. I think someone who's very curious is also really key. And the reason why would be, you're not going to be able to make everyone happy with sales copy. There's just going to be disagreements on if you should say thanks in advance or simply thanks, right? There's going to be all of these disagreements about best practices, and a good content writer won't just be sort of the content dictator. They won't go in and say, well, I'm the writer, I'm the one doing this, so what I like goes. What a good content writer is going to say is to say, that's an interesting suggestion. Let's make an A/B test about that and actually conduct an experiment that's going to give us meaningful data so that the next time I go into a writing session and there's a disagreement, I can say, well, this is best practice because we've tested it, and this one gets fewer opt-outs, or this one gets more responses, whatever it is. And so that content writer should be someone who's really curious and who isn't married to their own opinions about what's good content, what's bad content, but that is always open to being flexible, to being curious, and to learning new things with data. And it's kind of an interesting combination of skills where you want to be data driven, but you also want to be creative and open and flexible. And so a good content writer is going to be able to be analytical, but they're also going to be able to be imaginative and creative based on what the data shows.
Right, Erika, you mentioned about A/B testing. The reps are giving you, hey, we try this, try that, try this, try that, right? And so, to me, like that could be a little overwhelming, right? If you're getting a lot of requests. So,
Yep.
people have to be asking here, like, well, how many A/B tests are too much? Like, how many emails on one email step of your sequence or cadence is too many?
Yeah, I wish I could give you an answer, like 3. That would make it really easy to figure out if you're on track or not. I think with A/B testing, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to isolate variables whenever possible. Like come at this from an actual scientific perspective to say, okay, let's control everything else that we possibly can, except for one variable that we're going to be able to change. That way you can really understand what changes are having an impact in your data. I would say that's the first thing I look for when I'm assessing someone's A/B tests. It's not necessarily the volume, it's more the quality to see, are they actually conducting an experiment with intention? Is there like a strategy behind it, or are they just kind of throwing a lot of stuff out there, seeing what gets the most responses, and then just turning everything off? And then every single time that they're writing a new sequence, they're just doing the same thing. And it could be a good way to kind of, again, throwing a bunch of things out there, seeing what works. Sometimes you have to do that, right? We've all been in situations where it's just, hey, this is just going to be an experiment. We'll see what happens. But when you're talking about a long-term dynamic strategy, you really want to be able to say, for the next month, we're just going to run tons of A/B tests about subject lines, and we're going to gather data from a lot of different sequences or cadences or a lot of different content to actually be able to make conclusive statements to say, hey, when you put someone's first name in a subject line, it gets higher open rates on average overall. And so that might be then an element that you include in every sequence. And so I'm kind of straying from your question, but to come back a little bit more to that question of how many is too many, I think it depends on the capacity of your team and what you're prioritizing. So we work, like most of the teams that we work with, this, they're really overworked. They've got so much on their plate. And so to suggest to them that on top of enabling content, creating a full content strategy beyond getting the first meeting, to suggest to them that they should add an A/B test to every one of those sequences and then monitor it on a regular cadence, and then in addition to that, be able to document the findings and then, repeat those experiments. That, of course, feels overwhelming. But I think as a goal, just being able to say to someone, hey, like, the least you could do is have a few A/B tests going that are intentional and then record the findings and then move on. So my answer to that would be whatever you have the capacity for would be great. If you have a dedicated content writer for, a sales team of, let's say, 30 to 50 reps, I think that content writer has time to always be running a few comprehensive A/B tests, as well as maybe a couple of like event-based template tests or something like that. But it really just depends on the team. It depends on what else you're asking of the writer. If the content writer is a rep, probably not a good idea to also give them comprehensive A/B testing strategy projects. That's a lot for a rep to do on top of writing content.
That's really good. And listen, if you want to know more about the function of a performance analyst, which is needed,
Yep.
doesn't necessarily need to be a separate headcount, but someone has to wear that hat. And if you want to learn more about that, go deeper in that, we got a video on that, so you can check that out. I want to go now to understanding some of the common problems, challenges that this function runs into, and then also how to overcome them.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I want to be really careful about how I say this because I by no means want to put down marketing, right? I think sales copy and marketing copy are very different. A lot of times marketing is writing sales copy for reps, and one of the things that reps say is they look at it and they say, yeah, this feels to me like an email blast. It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't feel like one-to-one communication. I don't want to send this. And it's not to say that that isn't well-written marketing copy, but the purpose that reps are looking for in their content is to have it feel like it's coming directly from them to one other person. And that's a different writing style. It's a different skill set. And so that's one of the things that I think content writers can fall into is to say, oh, we've already done this for marketing. Let's just copy and paste this into our sales engagement platform and have the reps send this out. That's one of the ways that reps can lose confidence in messaging is if they feel like the sales engagement platform is just a marketing email blast tool. They're not going to think it's helpful for building relationships.
Those are some great tips on working, with marketing. You mentioned earlier about, sometimes there's misalignment between leadership and end users. And that content writer has to be someone that's able to raise their hand and say, hey, something's off here. And so obviously that's a challenge. You might want to touch on that again. And then what other challenges do content writers face?
Yeah, I think from a writer's perspective, something important to keep in mind when you're talking about, the misalignment between leadership and end users is that it's kind of to be expected, especially if this dynamic content strategy is something new that the company is rolling out. If you haven't paid a lot of attention to the copy that your end users are sending out, it's very likely that there is going to be some misalignment there. And so just to expect some pushback in the beginning and to expect that that's a little rocky can be very helpful, even just as a content writer to keep being confident that you're going to be able to add value, because you are playing that role of mediator is really important and really valuable. And I know sometimes it can be difficult as a content writer, especially if you're already embedded in the team, if you're not coming in as an outsider, but as, a rep, it can be really difficult to push back on like your VP of marketing or something like that. But I think it's an important piece of the job, and just to know that from the beginning can really help you be confident that you're not really trying to, again, be a content dictator. You are just basically trying to say like, hey, there's misalignment here and we're not going to be able to be successful unless we figure out how to get on the same page. So that's really important to be firm in that. And I think another thing, speaking about being firm, if you have a rep or a team manager writing content, this isn't always a big deal, but if you've got marketing writing content or you've got an outside agency writing content that doesn't know basically like your fiscal year, it's really important not to try to write a bunch of content at the end of the month or the end of a quarter. You have to be really sensitive to the sales cycle of reps, or when their quarters end or when their months end, because if you're trying to get time on the books with reps to interview them and to have editing calls with them, and they're trying to wrap up their quarter at the same time, that the quality of that work is going to suffer and the relationships are going to suffer. And so one of the things that we've learned to do in our discovery calls when we're talking about content projects with people is just to ask that, to say, hey, are we going to be writing, or we're going to be writing at the end of the month? Are your reps on, a quarterly rotation, or are they on a monthly rotation? Like, when are they really going to need that time to close what's in their pipeline? So just to ask about that and to be mindful of that, it can really help you as a content writer be on good terms with the reps, so you're not competing with their time they need to sell.
That's really good. I mean, gosh, as a sales rep, over the years, there's certain times when it's really, really busy, and it's difficult to add more things to the plate, at the same time, because you take your focus off of what you need to do. I want to end with what are the consequences of not having content writers. And I kind of know what you're going to say, and I'm a little antsy and excited, but I know there's some juicy ones, and a lot of people have not figured this out. They know content's important, and they've bought sales engagement. They've got this powerful engine now to really go after and execute their process, and then what, right? Like, what are the consequences of not having it, or not having too much of it?
Yeah, well, I think the number one problem that I would expect is low adoption of the content that's in your sales engagement platform. So if your reps aren't consulted, and your reps don't have a chance to raise their hands and say, I would never send this out to my prospects ever. If they don't have the chance to say that and they're not consulted during the process, they're not going to adopt the content. And again, like we talked about in the beginning, you're not going to get the insights that you want out of your sales engagement platform. And so a writer is very, very important to be kind of that front line of making sure that when the reps see the content, they like it and they're able to use it and that everything goes to plan. I think another thing, if you don't have, especially a consistent content writer, one of the things I say about sales content writing a lot is that it tends to be an aside of everyone's job. You have an analyst, you have someone to help you with implementation, you have someone setting metrics, you have management, you have end users, and then at the end of all of that, you're just about ready to go and people say, oh, right, we need content. And then it's just kind of like everyone just pitch it and write content and throw it in there and we'll see what happens. And I think what that does over time is that the content doesn't really follow a set of best practices that have been gathered by running experiments and gathering data. So for example, the emails will be way too long. Some of them will be, the correct length, just a few sentences, 5 or 6 sentences is usually what we say is best. But, without failure, when we go into an instance that has more than, 50 or 60 sequences, it's always true that there's going to be an email in there that has chunky paragraphs with like 10 lines. And you think about someone reading that on a cell phone. And I think, if you had a dedicated content writer, that would never happen. So I think that's really important too, or the content will use too many buzzwords, or another thing that happens too is that there's misalignment between what your leadership wants the go-to-marketing messaging to be and then what the reps are actually saying, and that misalignment goes unnoticed. And then later down the line, it's a lot harder to correct if it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I could totally see that. One last question before we end the video here. If you're a leader, how best can you support your content writers?
I think just to help them make sure that they can get enough face time with the right people. I think one of the challenges that we run into a lot when we go in and try to write content is we'll be, sort of in our discovery and proposal phase, and we'll say, okay, we need this many meetings of this duration with these people because of these reasons. And then as soon as we, the deal gets signed, we go in and we start writing. Inevitably, a manager or a VP will come back and say, oh, well, does this have to be a 60-minute meeting? Couldn't we do, a 30-minute roundtable with everyone? And so it's really important to understand that the content writer is an expert in writing and in best practices and in strategy. But your reps are really the experts in their prospects and the prospect's pain and what is helpful for their sales cycle. And leadership is really the expert in the go-to-market messaging strategy. The writer, especially from an agency perspective, or especially if it's someone else who has a primary function on the team that's not content writing, they can't possibly be expected to know all of that stuff better than everyone else. And so if you're not letting the content writer get face time with the subject matter experts, you're really prolonging the process and tanking your adoption, because they're not actually going to be able to get it right the first time unless they have the right amount of time with the right people.
Good stuff as always from Erika Davis. Appreciate it, Erika.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something that you can apply today. If you're not receiving our monthly Greaser Drip where we share our insights, make sure you go to our website and subscribe so we can get that to you. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel here so that way you don't miss any videos like this one. And don't hesitate to reach out. If you need help with your sales engagement efforts, we want to talk to you. We want to hear how we can help. And until next time, this is Houston. Over.